folks. Welcome back to the Rich Life podcast. We are going to be talking about spotting and reframing cognitive distortions. What the heck is that? I think one thing that I've always seen for very successful people is to have this aspect of self-awareness in a way, and you're able to monitor yourself and course correct without having to speak to a coach every single second and day. And so I think this will be useful to help you develop that in a way, or make one little change might be the takeaway goal from today's podcast. But yeah, why don't you give us a little bit more background on this topic?
I thought this topic would be a useful one to talk about because I think, especially in a lot of type A folks or high achievers, this is something we don't really talk about enough. These are actually very, very prevalent in people who are very driven and like to think of themselves as very successful people. Cognitive distortions are essentially biases. They're the irrational patterns of thinking that can skew our perception of reality. Often they're automatic, they're deeply ingrained, and we don't even notice them, but yet they're so powerful enough that it shapes our self-esteem and it really affects our decision-making and relationships. Oftentimes, cognitive distortions are our inner critics. They're the voices that forecast doom. It's like the perfectionist that says to you, hey, you're not enough.
Obviously, it comes from we lived in a dangerous world in prehistoric times, and the smart people were the ones that were like, oh, that thing is going to eat me, or this rock is likely to fall on me. Let's not eat my lunch over there. Yeah. So this is a very natural thing. And through evolution, smarter of us are able to think of crazy stuff to happen, like Final Destination style, right? Just freak yourself out and you catastrophize.
Correct. And essentially what our brains are doing is that they're trying to take short, protect us, right? So remember that our brains were designed to keep us safe, not to keep us happy and fulfilled. Okay? So in other words, our brains are designed to be prediction machines. They're evolved to scan for danger, detect patterns, and to respond quickly, especially when under stress.
Yeah. Procreate, don't die.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, your brain could care less whether or not you're happy or fulfilled. Those are secondary things. Its primary mission is to keep you safe and to survive. So when we're stressed, we're under a lot of pressure, when things are uncertain, the part of our brain called the amygdala, aka the fear center, takes over. And oftentimes it'll hijack your more rational part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. Again, great for survival, not so great for perspective. Okay? So Lena and I put together a list of some of the most common cognitive distortions out there, along with some tips for how to reframe things if you ever find yourself doing one or more of these. So the first one is this sort of all or nothing thinking. So for example, if saying to yourself, gosh, if I don't do this perfectly, if I don't nail it, then I'm basically a failure. Or if I miss one day of my training routine, I might as well quit.
Yeah. By the time they're 20 or 30, you're not a very happy person.
Yeah. So antidote of this is to remind yourself of the motto, it's progress, not perfection. So as long as you're making progress, then you're doing really well. Instead of saying I'm a failure, shift your language to phrases like good enough or I showed up today. You want to create this culture of normalized imperfection, right? Normalizing occasional failures and setbacks. And you really want to encourage consistency, just one small step forward each day.
In a microcosm, life is like just hitting a spike into a wood, right? You just take small chops at it. At some point, you're going to miss the nail, and you can either let it impact you a lot and freak out. You're obviously not going to hit the nail for a while. Again, doing what you should do.
Yeah.
Or you let it roll off and you keep going at it. In entrepreneurship, there's a saying that you go from the high point where you think you're going to take over the world to the low point, back up to the high point, and even to a lower point all in the same day. And in that day, if those low points bogged you down, then that day of productivity was over. And that's why it's important, this perspective of knowing it's not really how fast you go, but it's how steady you can go in a way. It's like the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah, it's about taking those small steps forward. I agree. That's really important as opposed to just trying to swing forward and getting the home run in your first try.
Or the negative viewpoint of that is don't just sit on your butt and sulk and do nothing.
Yeah. Okay, so the second, number 2 on our list here is catastrophizing. Right. So for example, saying, this is going to ruin everything. Or if I bomb this presentation, my career is over, right? Or one bad investment, I'm going to lose everything that I've built. Right? So you really want to, when you find yourself catastrophizing, you really want to try to ground yourself in fact and not fear. Right? A couple useful tools that I've found useful. One is you write down 3 columns. What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? What's the most likely thing that'll happen? And just write these out, and you'll oftentimes see that, hey, even in the worst case scenario, it's not as bad as you think. And oftentimes that'll sort of ground you back into reality.
And I'll also add on to that is, all right, if the worst case happened, what would be your action plan? Hypothetic. And sometimes you realize, wow, it wasn't, I'll be able to bounce back from it. The worst case isn't that bad. The saying goes like, when there's tough time, it usually flips back around. Nobody ever talks about when those tough times you're in survival mode. Maybe take these opportunities to brainstorm and different ideas in this state.
That's a very useful exercise to do. It's also a very empowering exercise, I think, because if you can plan for the worst case scenarios, it's much less likely that things are going to really knock you down, because if you've already thought of the worst case scenarios and what you're going to do, you're going to be able to bounce back real quick.
I'll just share that, like, personally. And I have to credit my coach for this. Said, look, I don't know if the worst case is going to happen. I don't know if the best case, whatever, is going to happen. But we know right now, probably at least for the next hour, maybe even day, that if we let this get to us and puts us into a bad state, we're not going to get jack shit done in the next hour. You've already lost. So I don't want to lose an hour. I can't control the future, but I'm going to win this hour, or at least not just sit on my butt and go backwards.
I love that. Yeah. So other techniques you can do if you find yourself catastrophizing is you can do this sort of mental time travel. For example, ask yourself, will this still matter in a week? Will it still matter in a month? Will it still in a year? You can also ask yourself, what have I survived before in my life that felt equally uncertain? So you can perhaps draw on previous life experiences to get you through this particular catastrophizing cognitive distortion.
And that's where, like, part of this is writing it down helps you verbalize things. If you wrote this stuff the last time this happened 6 months ago or 6 years ago, you could be able to flip back and say, I was feeling like a number 2 out of 10 back then. Yeah. This is nothing compared to that. And I don't even remember that if I didn't write it down.
And that's another example. When journaling is actually very, very useful, because you can look back on how you handled previous situations. So another common cognitive distortion is this idea of mind reading, right? So thinking that you can know what other people are going to think. Right? So for example, imagining the worst case where, she didn't respond to my message, she's definitely mad at me. Or they didn't smile when I gave my talk, so that means they must have hated it. So you want to reframe mind reading into just reminding yourself that you don't know everything that others are thinking, and you don't have to assume the worst. So write down some tactical tools you can employ, the evidence filter, right? So write down facts versus your assumptions. What do you know for sure? And then what are the things that you're actually guessing? Also ask, don't assume, because when in doubt, you want to lean into your vulnerability a bit and say, hey, for example, notice that you didn't respond to my message. Is everything okay between us?
Have a clearing.
Be curious. Don't necessarily assume that the other person is thinking the worst of you. And ideally, you want to be able to lean on yourself as an anchor. And so when you don't get feedback from others, you're able to ask yourself, hey, how did I do? What do I know that I did well? Right? Instead of being so reliant on external validation, for example.
Or was I in alignment in my values?
Yeah.
And if somebody is going to fault you for something that is within what you feel is right, then maybe they're just not worth it. There's a lot of people out there. And then one thing you said earlier, once you ask them and do a clearing, I would say most people are pretty cowardly out there too, though.
Yeah. Yeah, don't assume. Ask. This next one, I really think is important. And this is the...
Should on yourself.
The word should is a very disempowering word. You really want to reframe that and replace the should with something that's more aligned with your values and what you choose to prioritize. So if you find yourself, or let's say someone else using should, check in with yourself. If you're using should, check in, make sure that, hey, does this should really reflect my own authentic values, or does it reflect somebody else's expectation? Are you shoulding yourself because of what you think other people expect you to do or what will make other people happy? Right? Or is this something that you really want to do yourself? Another tactic you can use is write one out, right? For example, I give myself permission to rest, to take a day off. I give myself permission to be where I am, right? For example. Another tactic that I think is really powerful is when you catch yourself using the word should, swap it out with I choose, right? Or I get to, or it's important to me that, right? So like a common one that I hear is, oh, I should go work out, right? Replace that with, hey, I get to work out. I choose to work out, right? It's a privilege that I get to do this. Right? Notice that when you change the language, you just feel a lot more empowered.
Yeah, this one's kind of an indicator of how kind you are to yourself. I've had it told to me, like on your deathbed, there are three things that only matter, which is how kind you are to yourself, how fulfilled you were. Shoot, I don't remember the last name. It's not important.
Yeah.
That's the point. How kind were you to yourself? Like you're gonna go through ups and downs. Apparently, some people are gonna not care or not even think of it, but you're gonna be the one who's gonna be critiquing yourself. Are you be kind to yourself? If you aren't, you're sure making the ride a lot harder than it needs to be.
Sure. And I think that this particular one resonates with me. It really does give you a window into your self-worth and how much you think about your own value, right? It speaks to self-love. So if your self-worth, self-love is low, then more likely than not, you're going to be not necessarily doing things that you actually want to do. A lot of times you're going to be placing other people's happiness before your own.
Yeah. At first, I was, I'm pretty kind to myself. But then I was like, sometimes I do get, I should have done this earlier today or wasn't as productive after lunch, stuff like that.
Yeah.
This one plays out a lot in sports, right? They say you can go golfing with somebody, kind of how they are a little bit. Like they miss a shot in basketball. They get so down on themselves, right? You can see it. It's like, man, just relax. But that's their tendency.
Yeah. All right, so next, a common cognitive distortion is personalization. Right? So putting a lot of blame onto yourself. Right? So for example, this happened because I messed up. Right? Or if I had been more supportive, maybe the relationship wouldn't have ended. Right? Or it's my fault that the meeting went off track. I didn't manage the group well enough. Sometimes I find myself, I take things a little bit too personally. What you want to do if you also find yourself doing this from time to time is frame it, right? Frame it to remind yourself that, hey, I can own my own part, but also release isn't mine. Some tactics you can employ are drawing out a responsibility pie chart. So you literally draw a circle and then you estimate the percentage that's your responsibility and others and external factors that none of you have any control over. Another tactic you can do is role reversal. Right? So if a friend were in your shoes, would you blame them the same way that you blame yourself? Another tactic to employ is giving yourself self-compassion, pausing and thinking to yourself, hey, okay, I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean that I'm a mistake, right? Everyone makes mistakes.
A lot of these, and especially this one is you're living in the past. There is some appreciation for the past because you're able to reflect and make changes in the future if you have the self-awareness piece. But generally, they say live in the now, anticipate the future. Living in the past. They can definitely tell you what doesn't, like unsuccessful people do. And they always beat themselves. They always look back, tell stories from the past, make it hard.
Seriously. And another common cognitive distortion is this concept of labeling. And so, for example, labeling yourself a failure, right? Or labeling yourself as a bad parent, or saying to yourself, I'm just not cut out to be a leader.
Yeah, this is the living belief right here, right? Like, everybody has these.
So when this happens, you really want to try to reframe and remind yourself that, hey, one moment or behavior doesn't define your identity. And some tactics that you can use when you find yourself labeling yourself is be mindful of your language, be mindful of what's a behavior versus your identity. Right? So instead of saying, I'm disorganized, you want to say instead, I forgot something today. One is a label that is puts you into the box. The other is just like a one-time thing. Hey, I forgot something today. Nothing more. Another tactic to employ is lean back on your past experience. Think back of past situations where you moved from struggle to success. And think of all the different ways that you've already proven this label wrong with your own history. Additionally, you can give this inner critic a silly name. right? You can name it whatever you want. For example, perfectionist Paul. And just when your inner critic comes up, just be mindful of it and realize that, hey, this is just a side character, right? And this way, you actually give it a lot less power so that it doesn't become this overwhelming voice.
Yeah. If you're religious, you may associate it with the devil.
Yeah.
If you're not religious, the Stephen Presley, I think that's his name, Resistance, the guy who wrote the book, The War of Art, he talks about the big R resistance, and this is how it sneaks into your life.
Yeah.
Kind of sneaks in and tries to mess with you. But this one is very similar to one of the first ones we said, that, catastrophizing is very similar, because whether you're right or whether you're wrong, we know that it's going to take up your next 15 minutes, an hour, or one day, or for all we know, sometimes it messes with people for an entire year. So you might as well just let it just roll off your shoulders. Easier said than done.
All right. And then the last one that we put on our list is overgeneralization. Yeah, it's a very common one. So for example, saying to yourself, this always happens to me, or every time I try to slow down, something comes up, or I never get chosen for opportunities like this. So you'll hear these words like always, or every time, or I never.
I laugh because it's like when you're watching somebody doing this, or I picture like a cartoon, somebody doing this, it seems so obvious. But then again, I think we tend to do this from time to time.
Yeah, totally. It's much easier to recognize it than in ourselves, because most of us are in our own eyes, but it's always much easier to see it in other people.
Yeah. I went to a free seminar one time. The instructor used this analogy where you're driving in your car and you don't really have control over your radio, and a song that you don't like comes up. So that would be similar to overgeneralization, thought, or labeling, or I'm not good enough. You have to recognize when a song comes over the radio that you just don't like. And then awareness is one thing, but then you got to do something about it. And they made us do all this like kind of funny stuff that I don't like this stuff, right? You have to move around. I don't like that, but I did it. But now I remember it, and now I'm sharing with everybody here.
Yeah. So when you catch yourself like overgeneralizing, just reframe it and remind yourself that, hey, one instance does not define a pattern unless you let it.
Putting ideas in your head.
Some things you can do when this happens is you seek exception. Disprove this theory that something always happens. So for example, look for at least one time the opposite was true. Ask yourself, hey, when have I done this? Replace your language, right? Replace the always or never with sometimes or this time, right? So don't make the language as heavy. Just say it as what it is. It's sometimes, or it's just simply this time. Think of how would they reframe the pattern that you're stuck in. Or if you were mentoring a friend who was all overgeneralized, what would you say to your friend?
Yeah, that's a technique where like you personify like a historical figure or a mentor, like you said, confidence, and at least what you're supposed to do. Then the thing is that change the station on the radio.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, we put together this list of the most common cognitive distortions. Just remember that everyone has these, especially people who have high standards for themselves or are very driven. Oftentimes because we care deeply and we like to take responsibility and we set high standards. And in the end, it's not a flaw, but actually a strength. But it's important to notice that when you have these cognitive distortions, slow down and ask yourself, hey, is this thought actually helping me? Is it kind to myself? And is it true? Just remind yourself that you're not necessarily your thoughts. You can observe your thoughts, and ultimately you get to rewrite the ending. You get to rewrite your own narrative. Yeah, you have a lot more control over your final destiny.
Yeah. The default behavior is good if you want to survive in a prehistoric world of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases in modern society, it does not help you to get to that next level. Yeah, we will put this out again. And again, we are working on a little workbook. I know you guys a lot of this stuff, you absorb it, but you may not do anything. So I would always recommend you guys take some notes, more probably action items, I think, and commit to at least one thing that you might revisit or change as a small habit. I'm big on habits. Every month I take a day off and do these like meetings with my board of advisors, and the idea is to get out of the day-to-day and make these micro changes that at the end of the day, it really impactful. So hopefully that's one way to use these podcasts. We'll catch you guys next time.
All right. See you guys.